The worst thing we can do is have a system created based on how I feel it should work for the business when I'm not the one driving the project. And that's what I found in my career is you end up with, you call it manager influence, directing a system, which leads to rework, which leads to missed deadlines. Have a leader that will motivate you, inspire you, but treat you fairly and reward you for a good job. Set me on the right direction.
Welcome to the Change Agent Podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about people who are transforming their industry through disruptive change. We're talking about people who are willing to challenge the status quo. They're willing to think about their industry in a different way. They're willing to disrupt the industry that they're in, even while they're in it. They're willing to think about problems in ways that are different than the way the common person's thinking about those problems. They're bringing challenges to the market that the market is being challenged by. And this is a great opportunity through the Change Agent Podcast. We're going to talk about ways that people are thinking about bringing these opportunities to market in a way that has emotional intelligence and in a way that thinks about technology differently. I'm Nathan Lesnowski. I'm your host for the Change Agent Podcast. And week after week, we're having great conversations with great people who are really challenging us to be able to think about who we are, how we bring about change, and how we bring about change in a way that transforms our industry, the relationship with our customers, the relationship with our partners and employees. And this week is no exception. This week we're talking with Alan Murphy. Alan is the VP of Technology at Reinhart Foodservice and PFG. He has a mission of changing the way you bring about products to market, thinking about customers in a different way, thinking about how you partner a technology organization with those customers to bring capabilities to those customers that they appreciate and they'll use. Alan's going to talk about DevOps. He's going to talk about forming pods, how you organize individuals within those pods, and how you partner them with customers. Alan has a great story in terms of how he's driven this change. It's going to be meaningful if you're a business consumer or if you're in the technology organization. So without further ado, let's introduce Alan. Welcome, Alan, to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Alan, I think my first question in talking about the transformation that you're driving is just tell me a little bit about who you are. Tell me about the journey that you've taken through technology, especially the journey that you took through Reinhart Foodservice into Performance Food Group, and how you've stepped through different types of changes in your career through those points.
Yep. From my point of view, in IT, I started on the development side. So coming out of college, focused this on Microsoft.NET, delivering solutions and working more on the traditional full stack development. And so, early in my career, taking the part of being a BA, a developer, and a tester, and a trainer really helps make you well-rounded. And as my career has progressed at Reinhart, I tried to go through and actually recruit people similar to myself, looking for that full stack developer. And what we found is actually, people come out of college now are more specialized. They want to just be a BA or just be a developer. And so part of that change that I had to go through being a leader to help build a team was learning that, not everyone can be a full stack developer. So then morphing my team to be more of a traditional, IT department with BAs and developers and managers of development. And what I found in that change management is really the developers and the BAs reporting to different structures became silos. And whenever you have silos within IT or within departments, you end up with a lot of finger pointing. And you end up with the developers missing timelines because the BAs didn't deliver the right requirements, or the BAs saying the developers didn't test it. And really that change within IT leads to missing deadlines, being over budget, and not delivering the solution the business wants. And so at Reinhart, I had to go through and adapt my team, which was more focused on college recruits, to really get kids out of school that have that thirst and hunger to develop and crank out great systems, find that right model. And through the help of concurrency, we went through the DevOps transformation, but we still found that having the BAs and developers separated but working together really wasn't that good collaboration. And so we did a pilot of actually creating agile pods and going through and having 2 to 3 developers with 1 BA and having that pod own that solution, and actually taking the managers development and BA and myself out of the project. And still following the traditional SDLC approach with checkpoints, but letting them run it like a college project. And what we found is actually the speed to market was 2x, because all of the rework was never there, because the BAs and developers were in the meeting with the business early on to get the requirements. They were in that tech meeting all together to go through and get the approval for their tech design. They were working with the business to get the sign off. And so, it's not a traditional approach, but the overall speed to market, the overall results have been astounding for the business. And that helps us as a business has new projects, new demands every single day, especially over COVID. There are 10 different processes that need optimization due to being virtual. Having these pods in place, we're able to put them on the project, have them take it from start to finish in about half the time, and the business is better off. So it's really getting that change to the business is really speed to market on our solutions.
Awesome. I'm not sure everyone has a good understanding of what Reinhart and Performance Food Group do. Can you give us just a little bit of an overview of what the go-to-market is of those businesses and how you help serve the consumers that you're serving?
Yep. So Performance Food Group Reinhart is focused on food service distribution. So from independent restaurants to large chain customers, delivering the food to that restaurant to serve the customers. So like any other business in distribution, you still have all the same departments as any other business, but we have to go through and really focus on sales order entry systems and distribution processing, just to, from the low cost, low margin standpoint, optimize the overall performance of the business.
Awesome.
And we have a roughly 26 distribution centers across the U.S. in Performance Food Service Reinhart, and then across Performance Food Group. It is currently, I believe, in the higher 70s for locations.
Awesome. That doesn't necessarily speak to me in terms of, it's not a startup, right? It's not a startup business. It's not a born in the cloud sort of new cloud software development platform that's just come out of nowhere and is delivering something new. It's not somewhere where I think, oh man, that's the place where I'm going to be seeing all this modern development and pod development, but it is, and it's where you've driven this kind of transformation. Can you speak to, dive a little bit more into what this pod development concept looks like and how it's helped serve the customers of Performance Food Group faster?
Yeah, so from the overall distribution center concept, a lot of our systems, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s were all mainframe based. And as you know, most people out of college do not want to work on a mainframe. You end up with character length issues. You end up with overall systems, do not talk well. You can't just move your ERP on the mainframe to the cloud as easy.
Right.
And so we end up with this evolution of moving our ERP from being mainframe based to being .NET based. And so with that, as you go through and try and build an entire ERP module by module, it takes time. And so in order for us to actually go through and deliver it, we end up with we have our roadmap in place like any other large company, but we have to have our pods assigned to projects on that roadmap. And they go through, and once we have our project kickoff within IT, that'll be within myself, within the pod, like I said before, there'll be one BA, and most of them have 3 developers. And within that, we go through, we have that project kickoff. We go through the high level of what the project actually is going to be. It's about a 1-hour meeting. And then the BAs and developers go off and actually meet with the business. Now, whether that's doing job shadowing, whether that is doing documentation of current processes and finding optimization, they go through and gather all of the requirements. Now, traditionally, the developers that aren't full stack do not enjoy going through and sitting with the business or sitting and doing job shadowing. But it's obviously good for their career to understand the business, because the most powerful developer is going to be a developer that knows the business. So by having them job shadow, they get all those requirements, they come back and present their official business requirements to myself and the managers of BA and development. We go through and ensure we have the proper system requirements, but we also go through and do all of our UX at that time. We found with getting to speed to market, if we do not do all the UX design in requirement gathering, the business ends up with new requirements. So we want to make sure we have at least 90% of the final state in the requirements. And for whatever reason, when working on within different departments, you end up with not all requirements being pushed out early on. Things pop up within the UAT. That completely changes your tech design. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. And we found that doing the UX early on has avoided that. Once we have that approval, we go do a presentation in the business and actually walk them through all the UX, all the requirements. For an average project, this process of gathering requirements and doing the UX takes anywhere from 5 to 8 days. Unless this is a large system, then it may take up to 3 weeks. Once we have that, the BA has approval. The developers go off and do their tech design, where they're going through and doing table design, they're doing ERDs, they're doing all the different object class diagrams. At that time, the BA is actually going through and doing all the testing and creating test scripts to go through and have that all ready. By the time the developers start developing, we have all the PBIs created, we have all of the test scripts created. They go through, the developers then obviously get approval on the tech design. They develop the system. We go into UAT within IT, UAT with the business, and the implementation. During this whole process, following the, our change management within IT of how we've handled it, we end up with our daily stand-up, but the managers and myself are not really involved in those stand-ups. It is strictly that pod off on their own, running that project start to finish. We do not end up having a project manager involved in this pod development. The BA is the scrum master, and they take care of all of the traditional PM duties. And this overall process, by just having them not trying to find time on managers' calendars, has really helped emphasize that speed to market, because they're not waiting for someone to come back on PTO or getting my approval or someone else's approval.
You're really giving them the freedom to make mistakes and the freedom to engage those customers directly, maybe deliver something that needs to be adjusted, but they're doing it faster, so that iteration is happening faster, right?
Absolutely. The worst thing we can do is have a system created based on how I feel it should work for the business when I'm not the one driving the project. And that's what I found in my career is you end up with, call it manager influence, directing a system, which leads to rework, which leads to missed deadlines. And then that obviously then delays everything for the business getting the change they need.
And you get up with all this sort of playing telephone, right? When one person talks to another person, captures requirements and turns it into something else, and maybe the manager sticks their nose in and says they need to do it a different way. And you end up with a lot of churn versus the way you're engaging in it, which is let's get the people doing the work as close to the customer as possible and helping them to iterate with them on what the real outcome needs to look like.
Exactly.
Have you encountered a lot of pushback in using this technique? I mean, this is certainly you went from one approach to a different approach. Were there people who said, we can't do it that way, it's not going to work that way, we're going to make mistakes, the architecture's not going to be right because I don't have this amount of involvement, all these kinds of things? Where were the pushback items that you had to break through?
I think the pushback, honestly, was most difficult with the managers because they were used to being the ones to drive the project. And now they had to take a step back and let the pod drive the project. Since the average age of our developers and BAs is in the 20s, they're kind of used to this approach coming out of college. So the transition from college into working at Performance Food Group Reinhart is very easy because it's team projects. They go through all those and all the different capstone projects in college. From an architecture standpoint and really make sure the right system, that's why we implemented the different sign-offs to go through and get the tech design sign-off and get requirement sign-off, just to make sure the managers and myself who have years of experience ensure that they're heading in the right direction. But again, we're not influencing the final direction. We're letting them, fail fast and get that system to the business.
It's interesting from my perspective as a consultant, I see a lot of different businesses, and you see businesses that are really inefficient at getting anything done. And you see businesses that are very efficient at getting things done. And you see ones that are just complete train wrecks in a sense. And I think it's really interesting how you've adopted an approach which clears a lot of the barriers that create churn, that prevent forward motion. And even though it might create some initial rework or some initial spinning on different types of changes that are being presented to a customer, those changes are being presented in an agile fashion that's getting in front of them, getting reaction, bringing it back to them, getting reaction, and clearing a lot of the barriers that prevent a customer from being able to get what they need as quickly as possible, versus going through committee after committee to deliver a software product that may not even meet their requirements.
Exactly. And the other thing to look at is within IT, we all have many different projects going on at the same time. And from either a developer or a BA, when you end up being involved in 2, 3, 4 projects, you end up losing focus. And, as coming from a development background, if you're working all morning on one project and all of a sudden in the afternoon you're jumping to something else, the time it takes you to come back and get back up to speed, you lose kind of that momentum that you had early on in that project. So we also go through and make sure within our pods, they have one project from start to finish. So we do not have them go through and jump on a different project. If something's in UAT, they own it. And until they get that next project, we don't change our focus on anything else. And what it does cause, some angst is really working with the managers is when we have bugs come up, we don't want to take a pod that currently has momentum on delivering this great solution to the business. We want to have those bugs addressed by someone else. So we actually end up having a lot of our bug management handled by the managers. And that way the pods can continue focusing on those big rocks and delivering those as fast as possible and letting all that small noise that everyone hates to work on, having the managers kind of take care of that work really helps us with our change, getting that as fast as possible.
That's interesting. As you're talking about this, one of the things that I'm thinking about is how a person might think this is just a development conversation, or just a conversation about how you produce software. But I feel like it's a lot more. I feel like the concept of clearing these barriers and enabling efficiency by creating pods that are singularly focused, you're moving them, the multitasking from their day and focusing them on the outcome that you need to achieve. That can be broader in the business, can it? Like, how have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen within our business where you end up that traditionally you have a steering committee and a subcommittee, and you have all these different layers, and you end up with a team that's doing the work, implementing, business process change, that you end up with, call it 10% of your day focus on providing updates just to the different layers up, and then you end up hitting a roadblock, and instead of being empowered to go through and break the roadblock yourself, you have to wait till the following week until they have a steering committee to get approval for that next change. And so what I've seen with our adaption of really within IT helping the business is end up having that change go through. And as long as you can defend that change back to the steering committee, leveraging them is more of keeping them up to date, but not waiting for approval. And that has helped us on the business side go through and push out that change faster as well.
Have you found any techniques to keep your team focused? You're providing one benefit by having them being within a pod that's focused on a outcome for a set of customers. But have you found any other techniques to ensure they stay focused within that pod and ensure they stay delivering that outcome and don't get distracted by meetings here and committees here and a side meeting there?
The best way to keep them focused is coming out of that, approval standpoint is they create their timeline. So we end up with an agile approach within IT, but still back to the business and outside of IT, we really need to manage the waterfall. Most companies are not agile, and that transformation for the entire company to be treated agile, it honestly is not going to happen for a very long time. So we still run the overall project, the updates back as a waterfall approach. And so coming out of early on our project, our pod has to go through and create their timeline. And that timeline is more of a waterfall-based approach. And that is what they then are held accountable to. And I find just by rewarding and having the group own their timeline is self-motivating. If we go through and I give them a date, that's where you end up with, lack of motivation, people being dejected, people not wanting to stay late, people getting burnt out. If they feel inspired, this is their project, this is my date, I'm going to keep my word, I'm going to deliver this on my date, the motivation takes care of itself. That's just in my career, you want to have them self-motivated because you cannot teach motivation and you cannot push motivation down.
It gives a higher degree of self-motivation because they are the owners of the outcome of the project. They have that sense of ownership of what they're producing, right?
Absolutely.
That's That's very inspiring. And you could see how that could then also drive out into the business too and create better partnerships. Because that pod is so allocated to the outcomes they're driving and they have that sense of ownership, they see the partnership with IT and the business happening in a way that wouldn't have happened if it was just kind of time slicing here and there.
Yeah, from the business side, I mean, a lot of different departments want change. They want new solutions. And I found that a lot within IT, if we end up not delivering quickly, no one goes to IT for help, and they find their own way to kind of work around IT because IT is too busy. IT won't deliver on time. It's kind of just more of not a true partnership. And by having, our change in place in IT where we are confident we can deliver change, and when we give a date, we're going to deliver to that date, the business wants to partner with us more. So instead of them finding workarounds on processes or going out and finding a vendor and trying to implement the solution without integrations that then create more harm than good, they end up coming to us initially. So we have a seat at the table right from day one versus finding out about a project 2 months later. And then all of a sudden, once you are involved in the project, you can't really steer it to a successful conclusion. That's where I think our change has helped us really get that seat at the table with the business.
You really hit the nail on the head there. I feel like that necessary transformation of the IT organization to be able to partner with the business is not just about like, this is a little better, so we're going to do it. It's about, in order for us to actually be an effective partner for the business, we needed to do this. Otherwise, they're going to see us as too slow, not agile, not engaged, not able to deliver outcomes at the speed that they need to go to market at to serve their customers. And you've really thought about this in terms of this is about the technology organization really doing its job at its core.
Yeah, within my career, there was a point early on where a department wanted to go through and add their own developers reporting to that finance department because they wanted to go through and ensure they had the resources allocated to get their stuff done. Mm-hmm. And if you just imagine if you end up just having IT reporting to various departments without any sort of central ownership or methodology, in the long run, it would have been a mess. And so really by going through our change led us to go through and get that partnership, because if I end up having 2, 3, 4 developers report directly to finance without any sort of oversight within IT, we're just going to have a mess on the database side. We're going to have a mess on the application side. We're going to have a mess when we have turnover and trying to support whatever got put together. So that's kind of something that I lived through early on in my career that I wanted to make sure, never happened again.
Yeah, many large businesses, they end up having inside of business units development groups that function much like the pods that you have. But what you're recognizing and applying is how that pod concept can live within a centralized technology organization as well. If instead of them feeling like, yeah, I'm just kind of getting a slice of this developer here and a slice of this developer there, they're really getting a true partnership of a part of the organization that's tied in with them and has not the same sort of sense of ownership they have in their own business that they're having within the technology organization.
Correct.
When you think about the way this has changed skilling within the team, has it changed how they ramp up on technology? Has it changed the way they prepare themselves? Has it changed the sort of cross training that has to happen within the team so they can all be present within those meetings and effective? Talk about a little bit about the skilling part of this.
Yeah, from the skill set, I mean, we end up, in the past, we have that single SME where there's this, if I have a change to pricing, I go to this one person and that person is gone, that person leaves, you have huge risk, you have huge issues just trying to troubleshoot when they're not available. And so just from the skill set of the business knowledge, having that pair programming, having multiple people involved, it gives you coverage on turnover, it gives you coverage on PTO. From the technologies we leverage, it's also forced us then to go through whether you're creating something using Xamarin, you're creating something in .NET Core, it goes through and lets that pod learn it together. So you end up with just not one expert. We've had situations in the past where there's only one person knows the iOS application. And all of a sudden we end up with a huge backlog of change. and we can't ramp up resources because you've isolated that knowledge and skill set down to one person. Now we're spreading it across to a pod, so you end up with this a better approach, more resources that can jump into an issue or a project and help deliver on time.
What's been your approach to apply architectural best practices into the pods? As you decide, like, I don't want to have every pod develop something completely uniquely from each other. There's some characteristics I want to adapt and apply across pods, maybe to even increase efficiency of what they can pull off the shelf and reuse. How have you applied that, but then also give them the independence they need to be effective?
I would say that's a combination of years of building modules for them to leverage. So we end up creating our own .NET portal ERP that has reusable components, whether they're leveraging jQuery, they're leveraging .NET. But then, as that grows stale, we're going to have new things that pop up, whether it's leveraging Bootstrap or anything else. And so the pods go through and have the ability to go and recognize that we're missing something, recognize there's something that could be better. And so they go through and then create that POC, come back and basically present that to say, hey, we want to go through and use this in our project. And then we look at it and then approve that implementation. What we want to avoid is going through and having each developer go find a plugin online, download it, put it in a project. All of a sudden you don't have any knowledge. Microsoft makes a change with Edge, and now you go through and you lose, the system from actually functioning properly. From the architecture standpoint, it's more, the knowledge between the managers and myself, that review standpoint is critical, is to go through and understand how a project needs to work, how our future ERP is going to look and feel, and just ensure that each one of these modules is pluggable and playable. We've taken the approach over the years, this is getting really down in the weeds on development now, to go through and, every single project, has APIs on top of it. Every single project owns its own tables. So we end up with, system A can never access system B's tables. Everything's via an API. And that's allow us to be scalable from the system standpoint, because now we end up with our API library where all the developers have access to what's already out there, and they don't need to go through and reuse those components, rebuild those components already built. Versus at prior lives at other companies, you end up with, everyone sharing different projects, and you end up with this complete mess that is not scalable and is not maintainable. And that's my number one principle that I want for our systems is maintainability. And so any project, whether it's on the business side within IT, I find you're going to spend half your time up front actually doing it, but you're going to spend years going through and keeping that thing up and running. And so the more time you spend making that maintainable, the better off you're going to be in the long run for yourself or for anyone else that's going to maintain your system if you leave that company.
Awesome. Let's fly back up to the 30,000 foot level for a second. Let's say that you have pod A, pod B, pod C, pod D. How are you deciding as an executive team and a relationship with the business, what business projects get a pod? What business projects are prioritized to get that investment? And then how do you align that investment to where the core business outcomes that are strategic to the business are that you're trying to achieve?
So like any business, is creating that roadmap within IT. So within IT, you're going to have your roadmap on your technology suite. And that roadmap needs to be 3 to 5 years out, but you need to have flexibility on the current year as well. Mm-hmm. So traditionally, what we end up doing is building that 3-year roadmap, and those are what I consider our big rocks. But you're going to end up with, especially in the times we're in right now, where projects come up and you need to have that capacity to flex to something else. And so we end up building those roadmaps within IT, obviously working with the business leaders, all the VPs across different departments, to build that 3-year roadmap. And everyone wants their projects done now. That's never going to change. But to really get an alignment from the C-suite on here's the overall direction, but making sure we leave that 25 to 40% capacity for things that pop up. The worst thing we can do in IT is go through, build that roadmap. We're focused on the long term. We're focused on the midterm. Things come up in the short term, and we can't adapt quickly. And so that roadmap has to have that capacity on there for change. But a lot of the overall, I would say the high level roadmap, it honestly comes down from the C-suite. They are the ones that set the direction, the strategy for the business. And our job is to go through and create an executable roadmap that can deliver to that strategy.
Makes a lot of sense that the C-suite is defining the strategic direction, but then you've also allowed the tactical team to define the specific direction of an initiative because it's closest to the customer. So they're not sort of disjointing that specific initiative from its goal of achieving something that provides value to the customer, and they're allowing it the freedom to be able to execute.
Yeah, I've always taken the approach, within the C-suite of IT creates the vision. My job is to create the strategy. My team does the execution. And I look at that same approach of vision, strategy, execution when it comes to the overall C-suite across the business is creating the overall, the chairman is creating the vision, the C-suite is creating that strategy, and then it's up to IT to execute. So each one of those layers is then taking that 3-step approach.
Awesome. All right, last question, Alan. Can you tell me a little bit about a person or maybe even multiple people that have inspired you to be able to engage in the kind of change that you've been implementing within PFG?
So I would say it's 2 different people. The first one is well-known, Scott Guthrie, coming out of college when I did. And, being him at Microsoft, wearing the red shirts, being, a new kid out of college, it drove me to get my certifications, learn everything about technology, learn everything about development, bought books upon books, before Amazon was popular to go through and learn development. And then honestly, on the personnel standpoint, I had a manager right out of school, Dave Grossel, who actually I would say was the best mentor I could have had. I mean, he treated me fair, but he pushed me hard. And to go through and have a leader that will motivate you, inspire you, but treat you fairly and reward you for a good job, set me on the right direction. I find if you do not get a great mentor out of college, you can end up complacent, and then your entire career you're complacent. So I feel that everyone out of college has that drive, and you don't want to lose it early on. So that's why even personally myself now, I make sure all of our new college graduates, I have a personal connection with them, and I'm going through and checking in on them and making sure that they could keep that drive, because I never want to go through and have anyone get complacent in their career, because within IT, things change too much, and you did have that inspire and motivation for your entire career to be successful.
Awesome. Is Scott Guthrie, you're even wearing a red shirt today.
Exactly.
So you're in perfect position. Awesome. Alan, this was so inspiring and interesting. I wasn't expecting I knew you were going to talk about DevOps and the transformation that you applied in bringing Reinhart and PFG toward a new way of engaging with pods, but I didn't even think about how transformative that would be for the rest of the business, and even thinking about this as a wider business concept, especially in terms of its ability to drive change at a faster rate within the business, and the way that even changes the way people think about project management and BAs. And fantastic. Thank you so much for all the time today walking through those concepts.
It was my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, great time with our guest this week. Awesome comments, awesome information. A lot of information we're learning coming out of this today. So thank you, Alan. And we hope that it was helpful for all of our guests that were listening in on the podcast today. And we look forward to your next time visiting us on the Change Agent Podcast.